All right, welcome, and thank you for joining us for another episode of the Jane Irrigation Training Series. I'm Richard Rastusha, Vice President of Water Management Solutions, and today we're getting a little out of the box on irrigation, and we're going to talk about how to shoot better photos of sports fields. A lot of people ask me, well, why in the world do you do this, and what does this have to do with irrigation? And I always say, we're very fortunate to work in an industry in which our work has visual results, right? There's a lot of people who can say, I'm good at my work, but when we say we're good at our work in the irrigation or in the landscape or a grower, people actually see the results of our work and will make the determination on their own as to whether or not we're good at it or not. But when you are good at it, the great thing is you can take pictures of your work. If you put in a great landscape, if you're a grower, right? We talked about, why don't we have celebrity growers? We have celebrity chefs. Why don't we have celebrity growers? Well, in order to do that, you got to market what you're doing a little bit. And the thing that does the best job of marketing for our industry is photographs. And so today, we're going to talk about how to shoot better photos, because we really want to reward all of you that are putting in the work to have some great projects, some great landscapes, and we want to be able to see those and share those. So taking us through this today is Michael Derewenko. I've worked with Michael for a long time now, 7 years at Jane. We worked together at Valleycrest before that. And so I've known Michael for a long time, but a lot of people don't know that before Michael got in the irrigation industry, and way back, he was a contractor, an irrigation contractor, but between irrigation and irrigation contracting, he was a professional photographer. And it's not that often you find somebody in our industry that has also got the experience in photography. And he's super generous to share that with all of us on these webinars. We've done several about photography that have been very good, very instructional. But he also helps all his customers with shots. I'm always amazed at how many customers will say, man, I wish I had some good shots of this project or that project. And Michael's always willing to help them out and take some good photographs. And boy, that goes a long way for relationship building and just improving the industry as a whole. So it's great to see Michael caring about the industry and his customers that way. So Michael, welcome, and thanks for joining us again today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think that's a great pitch. I think visually, we think about curb appeal and how maybe the projects that we're a part of, how the effort is reflected upon the purchaser, the customer, the buyer, the homeowner. But marketing, there's more to it than just that. I mean, so you can take those images and ultimately market your services to others as well. And today we're talking about something that's a little more obscure, but I think there's a lot of detail that applies to just the day-to-day.
Yeah, so Mike, I'm like a lot of people, right? I'm an amateur photographer, struggling. I've got a couple $100 in equipment, certainly less than 1,000. And I watch videos like yours or read stuff on the internet about photography. And do I have any chance of ever taking a good sports field photo with that light background?
I assume you're talking about the prior photo image. Yeah, so I obviously never sought out to shoot irrigation on sports turf or obviously landscapes or any commercial projects. The professional photography background that I come from is shooting skateboarders and action photography. So I was shooting things that moved very quickly. A lot of the times with artificial light, but I think one of the main things that one of the appreciations that grew from this was when I started to shoot water. Water is very similar to something that's moving in action. Hopefully what a lot of viewers get out of this today is, we're not necessarily going to teach you how to, film, little Timmy on a Saturday morning running across the soccer field, but what you will get out of it is capturing action. And I think capturing action is one of the more difficult things to do in photography. So to answer your question, is there any chance of you getting an image like this? I think you'll learn very quickly that it is. It's not about the right equipment, and it's not necessarily even about the right person, but putting yourself in the right position to capture images like this. I mean, a lot of it goes into it. And I think that's what we're going to cover today, is more the circumstance of the things you can control, and not as much the action that you cannot control.
And as we're looking at this photo, I mean, this is really an amazing photo to me for a couple reasons. One, I can't believe the quality of the turf. My gosh, who's ever growing that, kudos to them because that's amazing. But then you have the water, and you can see at the end of the throw of the water, you can see individual droplets. So you were able to stop that action, yet there's shade behind it, which actually helps the light of the water, which I really like. But then to just make it a little bit more complicated, you've got the clouds and the sky and sun above. When you shot this, did you have any idea it was going to come out that good?
So this was in the time of digital. So I obviously saw the preview. You never really know looking at the preview what you're getting out of it. There's a couple things there. Digital photography, the technology has come so far. So we're able to actually grab some sky and some dark space. That is, I think most photographers would admit, grabbing those three contrasts of light, the turf light, the bleacher light, and then the skylight, is probably one of the more complex things you can do in photography, especially at a natural level. When we can control these different things inside in a studio, it's a little easier. This is one of the more difficult things to do. I think this came with like doing this for years and years and years. A couple things to point out here. If you look at the lights off to the back right, that's actually a light rig. And to your compliment about the turf, what happens here is when you have these fields where the turf is protected from shade or from the sun with these shade, or the bleachers, the people watching are protected from the sun. What happens is you create these shadows, and these shadows, like you can see what is down next to where the goals would be. This is a big soccer field in New Jersey. Well, that's actually a light stand that moves across the field at the same rate the sun does. So as the sun's moving across the dome, those lights are moving to counteract that shade to make sure that all the turf gets exactly per square foot the same amount of UV light and water as, so it's consistent. That's why that turf exists, because most people would look at that and go, how do they not deal with scalping on the outsides or the insides? That's how they do it. So they actually have these light rigs, and on top they have sprinklers that cool them off. But that's a giant light rig that a lot of our indoor growers are familiar with, that moves across. And so that's the value of the turf. The sprinklers themselves, we have to line those up and wait for them to line up and then shoot them at the right time. And this is where circumstance comes into it, and that's where obviously some experience helps.
Yeah, I was. So one, that's fascinating about the light rig. I had no idea about that. So that's really cool to learn about. And two, who got wet holding the sprinklers so that they all got kind of in that that unison that we see there, synchronized.
Well, it's funny because you made the comment earlier about us helping out our customers when they come to shoot these things. I mean, that's the value of the sales rep. And so the sales rep is the partner, and he's the intermediary between the marketing department of the manufacturer and the actual end user. And so in this case, we have a field manager that's out there that works for Red Bull in the stadium as a representative. And then there's a manufacturer's rep that would work alongside of me. I will tell you, my camera had a waterproof case on it, and I would sometimes just wear board shorts to these shoots because you would get so wet, and if it was hot you just get soaked. So you come to conform to the elements. But yeah, there's definitely a guy running in front of me twisting them, and then us giving it a 1 2 3 and shooting.
Yeah, very cool. I loved getting the history on that shot.
Awesome. So a couple things we're going to cover today. These are the things that I think are the most can be the most problematic for a lot of shooters, especially outside, within the elements. I think we've talked about this in the past, but I really hope that there's value in a lot of specifiers, a lot of designers of sports turf fields. Contractors and installing contractors should be looking at these things going, all right, this is the optimal time, and these are the circumstances I need to market my finished product or the finished project the best I can. And then ultimately, I would hope manufacturers look at this. One of the big things we had in the past was, 15 years ago, is a lot of irrigation was displayed or marketed incorrectly. In the late 80s, early 90s, how often did you see drip photos, of emitter line, and it's like above ground and snaky and just, moving around, and, shockingly, contractors didn't want to install drip. Well, I think what's happened in the last 10 to 15 years, and I hope that I've added benefit to that, is really marketing products properly. And one of the big things with a lot of the irrigation I've shot on sports turf is we don't want to see misting. We want to see pressure regulation or zoning properly. The hydraulics of the system need to be accurate. So it was always a big deal, those water droplets you talked about on the prior shot. those are things we look for. We want to make sure that we don't just see misting blowing in the wind. If that's the case, the last thing we want to market is a head that doesn't have the proper pressure regulation. So, so some of the things we've had to look at are details with the actual products on these sports turfs applications. But I think what a lot of, just typical viewers and amateur photographers could take out of this, there are some elements of how to deal with light throughout the day, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because as you and I were discussing earlier this week, when when a sporting event is going on, or when you can actually get access to a field, may not be the best time for light.
Yeah, I mean, you always hope that your kid plays sports in the morning so you can get it done and have the rest of the day to yourself. I play tennis, so I have to play all the time. So, you get used to it as an athlete. As a photographer, you got to do the same thing. There's got to be some evolution. And, in a lot of large areas, like we're talking about today specifically, we want to do the best to control our circumstances because we can't necessarily control the schedule that we're shooting around.
Yeah.
So that being said, a couple typical turf types. I know, just in case everyone's not familiar, sports fields tends to be more of an irrigation and a landscape, or landscape market industry term. I don't think. I think the layman, when they think about sports fields, they might ultimately think about parks and stuff like that as well. While there are short turf applications like that, when I think of sports turf specifically, as far as photography goes, these are some of the sports that I've had the advantage to shoot, and these are some of the ones that I'm kind of basing my advice off of. As a tennis player, I feel really bad leaving tennis off of here, but I've never shot a grass tennis court. So there are other sports that are not on here. These are the ones I'm familiar with. So these are the ones I feel like I can offer the most advice on.
Well, it certainly covers a big amount, a large amount of sports fields. That's for sure.
Yeah, good. So equipment. I want to start with this, and we'll get into some more details on the circumstance around what you're shooting. But one of the main things is I think there's this idea that you need to have a lot of equipment to shoot whatever you're shooting, and that's just not the case. And it comes down to any tool. You hand an amateur a shovel and you hand a contractor a shovel, you're going to see a significant difference in ability right off the bat. And so what you learn as you do something for a long time is that there's an efficiency to it. And I can tell you, as someone that's been doing this a long time, there is truly an efficiency to the amount of equipment you should have in your bag. And these are the few items you could have to shoot what we're going to talk about today in your bag without kind of breaking the bank, while also adding a dynamic to your photos that maybe you didn't have before, that are very simple to add. And so these are the things, any advice I give today could be done with this slide alone. So if you have a decent zoom lens, or a longer focus lens, a shorter focus lens, and a polarizer and a scrim, you're good to go. A couple details that I do want to point out. I don't want to mention exactly what's down below because you can read that. But if you look at the 35mm lens, and Richard, can you see my pointer right here?
We can see it great.
Okay, so the one advice I was given a long time ago was, growing up shooting skating and action photography, we were always shooting a wide angle lens. It's a very thick piece of glass. The closer you are, the thicker the glass, right? Well, the thicker the quality of the glass has to be. And so anytime you start to go away and you start to go anywhere from, I would say these days, 10mm to, in my mind, 35mm, you should be using what we call a fixed focus lens. See, it only says 35mm there, where this one says 24-70. While I always like having a nice zoom lens, and I think I literally have a couple of these in my bag, I like having that lens for a lot of these shots because you're moving around, you're getting closer to the subject matter, you're getting further away. You need to be able to zoom it out. However, as you zoom out, it does change the perspective of what you're shooting. And so when we shoot large horizons or large fields, as we zoom out with our zoom lenses, you can see the meniscus on the top of this lens. You do start to distort things. Well, the last thing we want to distort, especially when we're marketing irrigation, is the trajectory of our sprinklers or the landscape that we've just installed. And so you don't want it to look like a slope, but it doesn't need to be a slope. And that's what can happen with some of these zoom lenses. These zoom lenses are meant to be shot in the middle of their peak. So while Nikon may advertise that they have a perfect perspective from 24-70mm, I think most photographers would agree their happy spot is between 30 and like 60. So right in there, you're going to get the right amount of focus, and the focal plane is going to be where you want it without distorting what you're shooting. So if you do have a zoom lens, because they are less costly, you just want to avoid cranking it all the way in or cranking it all the way out. You're not going to get the crispest image, like crispest image like that. As soon as you pull it into the computer and start to look at it at a finite level, you're going to see some distortion around the edges. And so to keep an image from inside out completely flat, you use a fixed focus lens. And so when I was shooting wide angle lenses of skateboarders, we would shoot anywhere from 12 to 16 millimeters. They're all fixed focus. You're not zooming at all. You're literally just focusing. And so that's a difference in those lenses. You have one that you're going to actually be zooming with, one you're going to be just focusing with. And that's kind of the complexity of lenses and what you need to know. So when you see the really long lenses, the grade Canon lenses, people are shooting in the wild, very rarely are they just like cranking the zoom out. Most of the time, those are fixed focus, 2,500 millimeter lenses. If anything, the guy shooting the photo is moving closer or further away from the subject matter. He's not reliant on the lens to do the job.
That's interesting. I had no idea on that. That was very helpful. I want to ask about these polarizers now. The other day, I was driving down the hill in San Diego. You know, the sun's very low on the horizon right now because it's winter, and about 3 p.m. So there's the sun glimmering across the ocean. It looked fabulous. I pull over to take my picture. I take off my polarized sunglasses, and man, it looked completely different. I mean, 100% different. I thought, do I hold my glasses in front of my lens? And how do I do this? Well, this polarizer, will it give me the same effect as those glasses, as what I'm seeing through my polarized sunglasses?
Exactly. Yeah. And so, you know, it even takes it a step further. The cool thing about most polarizers, this is a circular polarizer, also very similar to the one I use. The cool thing about polarizers is your sunglasses, actually, it's 2 different layers that are put together that actually add that polarizing element. So that's why you can buy the polarized version of, you know, Ray-Bans or, you know, whatever you're wearing, and then the unpolarized version. It's not necessarily a film, it's actually a separate lens. And so what happens on these polarizing lenses, it's actually like an Oreo cookie with 2 layers, where there's a back layer, which is the clear layer, that twists on your camera. And then there's the front layer that actually moves on like just an axis where it goes around. Well, as you manipulate that front part of the polarizer, it changes where in your image you're getting more or less polarizing. So for an instant like that, or even the previous image of the one we're about to look at, actually, that's a good segue. Okay, so in this particular image, you can see how there's backlight, so you know the sun is just popping right there. But I need to make sure that the ground still, I get my light down there. In that case, I'm going to twist the polarizer to make sure that the sky and above the horizon is more polarized than the ground. And that's going to add this effect. And so while that might look like there was some after effects, and I know this is straight out of the camera. A lot of the photos I'm using today for this presentation are straight out of the camera. So if you see debris in the golf course, or in this case, I would have definitely lightened up the Carnoustie Hotel right there. These are straight out of the camera, and I thought there was value in that, so people could see what it looks like coming out of the camera. Every image you see today was captured straight out of the camera with no post work done to it, to add that element of, hey, you could do this too.
Yeah, well, that's cool, right? And I'm glad you mentioned that, because we might have thought, oh, well, you know, this was photoshopped or something, but it's not.
In the past, that has been the case. I mean, from a marketing standpoint, if we have to drop in verbiage or copy or something, we're going to make those changes. But you know, I thought I'd stick true, and I think sometimes the message gets mixed when I put stuff straight out of camera and then post, you know, operated stuff in there. So I thought today we'd stick all the way through. That way you can see exactly what it's going to look like coming out of the camera, and I can also point out some flaws in what I haven't accomplished with some of these. One being the little bit of water in front of that rotor is driving me nuts right now, because I know that's a faux pas with golf and turf managers. So
Well, that's good to know.
So anyway, so this was Carnoustie Golf Course. This is the 18th. Oops, sorry. This is the 18th hole of Carnoustie Golf Course. We waited for the light. It sits up on a cliff in Scotland on the east side of the island. So you know, obviously we're waiting for the sun to move exactly where we want it to move. It's a golf course. Some of the challenges you come across on a golf course is obviously there's people golfing. So the last thing we need is somebody to fly to Scotland to golf, and then we're cranking the rotors up prior to their round. So a lot of the circumstance revolves around when we can turn sprinklers on, when the golfers can golf, and then when we ultimately need to be shooting. So a lot of time when you see images of water, those are things to think about. I mean, there was people golfing this day, and we had to go in front of them and make sure that everything wasn't soaking wet and they weren't putting on wet greens. That's the last thing we want.
So Michael, in order to really be able to see that water coming out of the sprinkler, I mean, just coming all the way down to the turf, is the sun behind? Is it behind you shooting? Where's the sun to get the best shot here?
In this particular case, if you just took that stream and you went straight up and you clocked it about 3 positions on the clock. So it's not directly above it, but it's off to the right. If you can look at the shadow, see how the shadow is to the left of the stream, you can see it opposite that shadow from the stream is exactly where the sun is. So this is actually not the most ideal circumstance to shoot in, because I'm sure we were operating around golf course stuff. So we were shooting more in midday than we wanted to. Not a lot of people want to golf in the hot midday in Scotland. But when we can control the light, ultimately we're looking for this kind of light. We're looking for light that's going to be behind the sprinklers completely, but also not enough that it's going to produce shadows across the heads themselves. So you can see in this particular one, all the heads are lit up. You can see the turf around them. You're telling the story that this water is making the turf very healthy and hardy, while at the same time, the spacing delineates any shadows or any trees that may be producing spots off to the right. And so from a manufacturer standpoint, any irrigation manufacturer is going to go, this looks great because the turf is consistent from the shade to the sun, and they don't have the big light beam that Red Bull Stadium had. So, what you're really trying to market in a case like this is the consistency in turf. And, it also, for the amateur that's shooting anything on sports turf, that's really what you're trying to show. Anytime you see patches or a wear and tear on a soccer field or on a baseball field, you really want to try to frame those out. So if you show up to a baseball field, to shoot your kid, and a certain part of it looks like crap, you really got to get up off the bleachers and move around. And a lot of these shots, all these shots really required me walking, this circumstance over and over and over to figure it out. I mean, you're watching sprinkler heads rotate with different rates of rotation. You learn a lot about the grass and a lot about the pitches and the grades that you're shooting, much less about how the light moves across it.
Yes, but one challenge I have, Michael, and I know a lot of people have this challenge too, looking at their photos. If I took that shot you just had up there, after I took it, when I was looking at it on my computer, I'd see some litter in the shot, right? I see stuff in the shot much more easily when I'm looking at it on the computer than when I was actually there, right? And we do this all the time. Oh my gosh, I didn't realize, I had that rag out there or whatever. How do we take, what do we have to do to really see that before we take the shot, instead of finding out after we take the shot and it's too late?
So once again, we've talked about shooting for a final medium in the past. If the idea is you want to show the perspective of a place that has absolutely no litter, there's a combination of efforts. You either go pick up the litter and you don't worry about the Photoshop or the post work you're gonna have to do. So sometimes, if it's something that I can grab, I can't tell you how many times videographers that are working on the same area as me are like, we'll just fix it in post. Yeah, I mean, you're just displacing the effort. So yeah, you could always just make sure. In this case, I think this is the Equestrian Hall of Fame. So there was horses in these chariots that would roll through here. I went through for probably an hour before this shot and just had a bucket and picked up like pieces of like dirt and turf that were coughed up, because I know that, like you say, I'm gonna have to go back and you got to use Photoshop to do it. As far as I know, Photoshop's the best way to do it, and there's little patch tools, and the band-aiding tools have come a long way where it's not hard, but you do have to have the software to do it. But look, it comes down to light. If there's litter on this field and that light's raking across the turf, you're gonna see the litter. If you're shooting in midday, you're probably not gonna see the litter. So if that light's raking across the grass the way you want it to, all those little things are going to pop up. So you either need to plan on making sure the situation is ideal or fixing it in post, because you will have to do so.
Okay, so I mean, it sounds like the real secret is take your time, make sure you get your shot set up before you take it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true with any photography. There's a difference between point and shoot photography, which is iPhone, which is point and shoot, like, oh, this is it, this is the best this photo will ever be. And then there's this level of photography where you're hoping that whatever comes out of your camera is going to require minor elements of adjustment before it meets its final medium. Speaking of that, so on the lighting kick, lighting has never been more important as it is when I shoot action or when I shoot water. And I really like the idea of shooting water. We can shoot waterfalls, we can shoot fountains, but very rarely do you have water coming from the ground in a trajectory that's already been pre-planned or pre-organized. Minus the actual rotation of the sprinkler, the trajectory is rather consistent. So we're always able to manipulate it and move around it. It's always coming from the same spot. As you can see in this photo, by the way, I want to hint, this is water on a lens. So when water gets on a lens, you get these dark spots. This stuff right here, this is a photographer's nightmare. All these little dots. That means I got wet that day. So as I rotate around, I can, the cool part about it is once you have that center axis on a sprinkler or on whatever your focal plane is, a valve box or something on the project you're working on, the sun's going to be at certain perspectives, you can move around it. And so while the sun might not be at an ideal location like this one, anytime I see the shadow of the stream directly below the stream, I know that it was probably a forced shot. This one was in the south of France, so I'm sure it was forced. But you have the power to move around it. And that's the big one is you're not always at the mercy of the sun. You have the power to move around it. You're not using a tripod for something like this. And in this particular case, you can see all the sprinkler heads are lined up. The one thing I do want to point out about this top image is that horizon is relatively straight, but you see how you can tell it looks like it's like the shape of the moon where it like curves. A lot of sports turf for drainage purposes has this like dramatic curve where if you've ever been in I didn't put Madrid, the football team that plays in Madrid, when you're standing on one side of their stadium on the sidelines and one side of the other, all you can see is waist up of the opponents on the other side. That's how dramatic that shift or that contour is to try to displace the water as they irrigate. So you got to take that into account. So if you're trying to shoot a player on the other side of the field with a long lens, you can't chop them off, because of that contour. You've got to give yourself a few levels of the bleacher to get up to shoot them. A lot of times during football games, you'll see those monopods the cameras are on. You see these guys standing like this. The reason they're doing that is they're trying to make sure it looks like in the photo that they're shooting straight on, because in real life, they're more shooting up or they're more shooting down because of that grade change. Do you understand that?
Yeah, no, it's great, right? I always think about football, run the players to the short side of the field because you're running downhill. But
Exactly.
I never thought about the nightmare it creates for a photographer. Hey, so this
Yeah.
bottom photo here, was that an overcast day? Was that just after the sun went down or before it came up? What's happening there? It's a beautiful shot, but I'm looking at that sky and it looks gray.
Exactly. So, typical UK gray sky. This is an example of not the ideal circumstance to shoot, but forced to shoot. And something like this, we would have pulled our sky and we've done a boatload of post work on this and added a nice blue sky. There probably is a post version of this. But yeah, that's the best natural polarizer is the clouds. And a lot of times the cool thing about an iPhone is the reason there's 3 lenses on the back is because you have 3 different reasons for those lenses. One is the macro lens for zooming in close. One is the zoom lens, which gives you a little bit of medium to far perspective. And then the third one is their new portrait shooting, which is what you see on sports events and stuff now, which is basically like a drop focus or it's a tight aperture. Instead of giving users the option to adjust their aperture and being at the mercy of the user, they've actually given you a whole new camera and a whole new lens or new lens that actually drops out the focus. And now you have to do is just get within, 4 to 10 feet, and it drops the focus out for you. That's all portrait mode is a tighter aperture, a tighter focal plane. And they do that by giving you a whole separate lens, which I always thought was funny that iPhones went from 1 lens to 3 lenses. And instead of teaching people how to shoot photos, they're like, we'll just give you every lens in one device so you can never be wrong. So that's essentially what they've done. And so in a case like this, yeah, it's dark. That's an unusable photo. everything was blooming in the background, and that was an ideal time to shoot, but the clouds would just not give us a break. So we would have probably in post torn out that whole white sky and added a blue sky, similar to this.
Wow.
So yeah. So yes, I mean, this is all about, like, searching for the best light. And when we have these bleachers, the contrast between dark shadows and bright lights, and then water that's obviously a reflective surface, the contrast from one to the other can be rather difficult to capture, but you learn with experience. I have many of years and 10,000s of photos before this that didn't come out, so it took a long time to get to this. But I think bending your knees is the big one if you're using an iPhone, finding the right time of day, and you can never beat touching the screen when you're shooting a photo on your iPhone or your phone in general, to make sure, because it's not only finding a focus part of your frame, it's also metering, it's light metering. And so in this case, you would be probably clicking on like where the middle of the bleachers are. You're going to find the middle average light in a frame on your phone. You're going to touch that, and it's going to meter between the sky and then the darker parts of the image, and hopefully give you some deep contrast where you can pull it into the post aspect of a photo on your phone, not like Photoshop, just something simple. And you can add brightness to it, but at least you have that like clarity to the whole frame, not just a particular point. Everyone always wants to click on their buddy's face. It's like, now click on his like left shoulder, or like right over his shoulder by a couple feet, on that tree, because that's going to give you a better average focal plane to manipulate in the post little, photo program you can work with.
Wow, what a great tip. Now, I want to just talk strategy here a second. I tend to take a bunch of photos, right? My strategy is take 100 photos of the same thing, and then afterwards figure out which is the best one. What's your strategy?
I mean, I used to shoot thousands upon thousands of photos. Now I spend more time on setting the photo up. As we talked about earlier, once you start to get kind of your framing, which is a good transition into framing perspective and larger landscapes. Once you kind of get your framing down and you understand, the scope of how, or the forum of like how far your lens stretches from left to right and up down, you end up trying to want to focus your attention on what you're shooting, not necessarily what you're going to fix in post. And so I would say, and as what do we have, 5-day shoots where the first 2 days are just prep. So, I mean, in the past, I would have just shot for 5 days and tried to make it work. I think what ends up happening is you start shooting more, you realize I don't want to be downloading thousands of photos out of my camera or my phone to find the right one. There's nothing worse than asking someone to take a photo of like you and your mom, and they're like, they click, 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 and then you've got to go through the 30 photos where it's just kind of slightly different. And so I've gone from wanting to shoot more because I don't think people have the time or want to have to go through and find the right one. I'd much more like to shoot 5 of the best things I can shoot, put the most time into prepping those 5, and then choose 1 or 2 that I like, as opposed to shooting a million. I think shooting a million photos is just like anything. I think it's a learning experience. I grew up shooting film, so if there's anybody with boxes of film, you definitely learn how to shoot photos the hard way. So I would say now I try to focus on getting the right image as fast as possible. But to answer your question, I mean, yeah, you're gonna, it depends on the value of the project. Does the project require hundreds of photos? Or if I can get us even close to where we need to be, that I can go back, review what we've shot, and then the next time I shoot it, for next Saturday's game, take those elements into account. Because let's be honest, nobody's downloading 300 photos from, this Saturday's T-ball game and going, this one's better than this one. Usually it's because they're out of focus. Those are all things that can be corrected outside of the realm of when a game is going on, or when you're in the elements of a sports field.
That's great advice. And even then, right, if you're comparing 100 photos of the same thing, it's nearly impossible to figure out which one's the best one.
Of the 100, there's probably like 3 things consistently wrong with most of them.
Right.
So if you could just focus on those 3 things, then you won't have to shoot 100 photos. And so that's why we narrowed this down to a few things. I think lighting is the most crucial. You should always seek the best light possible, the best perspective for that light possible. And then moving into this, which is Obviously perspective, just like sports turf with gardens and landscapes, there's a very similar aspect to it where you can see the light in these. We light the water very well. We've got very, depending on whether or not it's a traditional spray or a streaming rotor nozzle, we found a way to put the light behind it and kind of capture, how kind of elusive these sites are. I mean, this is a park in Madrid, in the central Madrid. This place is amazing. It was a royal palace at one time. And I think there's very small tips when people shoot their landscapes after an install that we've briefly talked about in the past, but I think some of these are like the grandiose versions of what I've talked about. And I've always told people, don't shoot your landscape right after you've installed it. I mean, I know you've just come off the sale and you've installed it, but nobody wants to see a 2-gallon viburnum, in the landscape. Make sure it's properly irrigated, form a really good relationship with the customer, and then plan on coming back 6 months to a year from now, putting a day into prepping it for the shoot, and then shooting it, and then you'll have a great final product. But it's really hard to market landscaping when it's like a fresh landscaping. You really want it to be a mature landscaping. And as you can see in the bottom right here, that's about as mature as you get. I'm sure those bushes are 50 years old. And so in doing so, your trees are taller, your trees frame the lower plants better, which is what the architect that designed it's, the reasoning behind their design and their plant choices. And so as you can see here, it's a very mature landscape framed with great Italian cypress, Richard. I mean, maybe better. I think those are Italian cypress or
yeah, absolutely. And these shots are so great. You're giving me the travel bug right now. I'm I'm going to be booking a flight right after this webinar.
I vaguely remember this, but I definitely remember turning on the sprinklers at this place was a big deal. They had, I think, the World's Fair here when they Thomas Edison, or this was back in the 1880s, prior to the Chicago one. I just remember it being a big deal. They turned the irrigation on and that we were able to shoot this place. The oldest tree in Spain resides in this park somewhere, to the point where during the Spanish Revolution, they had to pull a cannon up there to shoot out of. So I'm trying to this is a while ago, but I'm slowly remembering a lot of this. I also remember they had a drone lawnmower for that area right there. And it was like Husqvarna was testing their drone, the first automated lawnmowers, because in this park, it was so nice of a park that I was like, when in America, somebody would just steal that and try to figure out a way to use it at home. But because it was such a protected park that they were using them there, which was a big deal at the time. But yeah, a little bit of the travel bug. I mean, that's the beauty of the circumstance. You put yourself in the right scenario to shoot a good photo. Usually you'll get what you want. And so that's what you look for. So I put some tips there too for people that watch this after. And if you have any questions on that, let me know.
Wow.
So another one is equestrian centers. So equestrian centers, they run the horses on turf, they run them on dirt or sand. The equestrian centers need water too. So in Central Florida, there's a huge equestrian market all the way down into the Gold Coast of Boca and Palm. We have Palm Springs in California. Out here we have Palm Beach. So they have beautiful horse and equestrian facilities throughout Florida. I've been to some overseas as well. But there's a lot of liability with irrigation around horses. The last thing we need is a $500,000 horse stepping on a sprinkler and breaking its leg. So what they do is they mount them to the poles on the outside. Well, now we're moving the trajectory of the irrigation 4 feet off the ground. That's something that I'm not used to shooting. So it became rather difficult. So these were some of the things we had to figure out. What was the alignment of the irrigation that we wanted to try to promote the coverage? We want to show that the heads are not hitting people in the stands. By the way, the stands, this is a private facility that somebody has their own little private race, I guess, a couple times a year for them and all their friends to race their horses. So this is a giant private facility. And I won't tell you who owns it, but he's no longer with us. But he did own a famous sports team that wasn't in Florida. And he was really into horses. And this is one of his facilities where he raced these horses. Well, you have these heads 4 feet off the ground. That put him some challenges. Once again, straight out of the camera, I can see some flaws here in what I've shot. There's way too much sky. The horizon's almost right in the middle of the photo. And anyone that's watching this has seen my seminars before. I don't like the sky being right in the middle, or the horizon being in the middle of the frame. I would definitely get rid of some of that sky and probably add some elements to it. I also see some brown in the middle of the field that we would eliminate. So as opposed to, like you said earlier, Richard, getting rid of litter, you could be getting rid of litter, but what I'm looking for is things like that. As somebody that's trying to market the value of the landscape or the irrigation, we want that consistency. That's what people subconsciously look for in landscapes. Just like I said, when someone plants a new landscape, the last thing they want to see is 40 beautiful plants and then a brown one. They want to see consistency, and that's where our value is in knowing what we're doing with irrigation properly.
Looks like you're up on the roof of something here. Is that what you had to do? You had to get on somebody's roof?
This is the bleachers. So this is all just a giant private facility. I don't even think the only house on the property is for the person that takes care of it, like the caretaker. That little hut in the middle is that's the front of a party house, where there's like a whole party house for the middle. And then I'm up on like the bleachers, where normally during the events, like you can see right below me, they'll stretch off tents across there with whatever the event is. I know there's a lot of like Budweiser, and there's big corporations that probably rent out this facility, so you could put custom tents across there. I'm actually at the bottom of the bleachers shooting down, and even at the top there's the announcement thing. But this is a whole like mini Del Mar for a private facility. It was pretty remarkable.
That's pretty cool, and I like that aerial perspective down on the turf. It really gives it a nice feel.
And there's another row of sprinklers on the infield too, that have to shoot the opposite way. But the idea is that, once again, we're creating that consistent trajectory. Our DU rate is consistent, where even if the horses are running in towards the middle of the infield or on the middle of the track, that it's not tearing it up. There's not more moisture here than there is here. You can see the green is relatively consistent, because that's the things you have to look out for. Sometimes you're 12 horses wide or 11 horses wide. Sometimes they're in line, and so their big thing is making sure that the DE rate is consistent across them. Once you've moved a sprinkler 4 feet off the ground, you can imagine the challenge with wind. And so that was some of the complexities I saw from an irrigation side and designer and contractor side from these sites, with some of those challenges they had to deal with. A lot of times they end up running these sprinklers for way longer than they need to, because there's no way to get water to the middle of a span that is that wide, and you can't put sprinklers down the middle. And so you have to kind of overwater to get the water to where you need in the middle.
Very nice.
Also, there's facilities that are indoors. There's indoor, anything from roping or when they tackle the cows. We went to the rodeo a long time ago.
Wrestling, that would be.
I know.
I like tackling the cows though a little bit better.
Yeah. I forget what it was called. I love wrestling, and I grew up in Texas. I should know this, but there is indoor circumstances that sometimes we come across. And one of the main things, once again, these are straight out of the camera, so you can see the beautiful polarizing that the sun is. We call this GL or God light. It happens towards the end of the day, especially in the southeast and the Midwest, when that sun just comes across the clouds perfectly. You get that great backlighting, and that's what's happened in the bottom image. You can also see the protected sprinkler head to make sure that if a horse does go over there, he doesn't hurt anything. And then the top image, sometimes we're shooting stuff inside. I mean, there's polo fields that are indoors. There's tennis courts and volleyball courts that are indoors that are on stuff that requires water. People forget that a lot of synthetic turf actually requires irrigation, because it gets so dusty and so hot during the summer months that it can either burn you. I've seen valve boxes that are flipped over lids, and within 2 hours, they've left a perfect burn mark on the synthetic turf. So a lot of times you're going to come across these circumstances where maybe you've got some shade and sun to deal with. As you can see in the top image, what I've tried to do is I've tried to allow that light to rake in from one side. And so I never have too much hot or too much dark in the image. And it kind of adds that consistency. And so you can see it still kind of markets the warehouse itself, or the structure itself, along with showing you what's below it.
So is the secret there to get that light right in the aperture speed?
So the two things would be the aperture and then the shutter speed. If I'm shooting water or anything moving, the shutter is going to become a variable. Typically in a kind of a stale shot like that, you're going to be really just kind of manipulating the aperture. One is like, for instance, you can see the fence and the farmland kind of in the back. that would be way more blurry if I had adjusted my aperture and made it tighter. Also, because if you think about how far the back corner of that structure is, I mean, it's 120 yards from me. I have to make sure that my aperture is pretty open. Well, as soon as I open my aperture, I allow way more light in. So you got to be really careful to find that happy medium, and then that's where you would adjust your shutter. So you raise your shutter, make it 125 to, in this case, probably 160, and then I would open my aperture up. That way, my focal plane grows and gets deeper, but I don't lose any of that that contrasting light that I want. So it's the combination of the aperture, the hole of the aperture, and the speed in which the shutter is allowing light to go through that hole. That gives us that. Also, because we're shooting digital, I probably cranked up my ISO or ASA, whatever you want to call it. That's our film speed. In the past, we've talked about this. This is essentially the thickness of the film, or in this case, the thickness of the sensor and how much light it's allowing in. In this, I've probably allowed it to go upwards of 400 or 800, which was 800 was not like a film speed a lot of people shot. It's a lot of available light. So we have available light that the film is letting in, combined with focal plane, which is controlled by the aperture, and then how much light is coming in also is controlled by the shutter. So it's a combination of those three elements.
Yeah, 'cause what I really like about these two photos, and the thing that most people don't get, is the depth, right? These look almost 3D. There's so much depth in them. And that's, to me, what makes them so beautiful.
And that's why that juggling game and shooting a million photos, that's where it comes into play. And digitally, we have the beauty of you can make actually your camera, you can make it reliant on aperture or shutter. That little A or that S you see on the top of your SLR camera, what it's doing is it's adding a priority. So it's either saying, we're going to set the aperture, you're going to push the button halfway. It's going to tell me, depending on where your little focus square is, this is the aperture you need based on the shutter and the ISO you've provided. This is the aperture you need to get, an average consistently lit image. Or you can make it shutter, where, hey, I'm shooting something faster. I'm going to make my ISO or my film speed open up a little so I can allow more natural light in, but I'm going to speed my shutter up. Then the camera is going to apply the aperture. So that didn't used to be the case. So now you can actually play with that. So everyone always puts in a manual and then they just, circle back and forth on the dial until everything works out. The best thing you can do is go out, spend 10 minutes in your backyard with shade and sunlight, and just play with shutter speed and just twist it from low, whatever, 60 all the way up to 10,000, shoot something, and then put it on aperture priority. It's just the dial changed from A to S. Just change it, because I've met a lot of people, even pro photographers, they'll shoot aperture priority. They're allowing the camera to make a setting adjustment based around the parameters they've laid out. It boggles my mind. I could never do that. But they do it because when you're in a sports field and the light is so consistent, you've already applied the consistent variables. Now it's just up to how far you're shooting away, and the cameras will prioritize that. And that wasn't the case. So to answer your question, you can manipulate that either in your camera, or you can learn what all these variables do manually and adjust them like I do.
Yeah. Okay. Good. That's what I like.
So only a couple more kind of examples on what we've talked about. I know we're at 45 minutes, but yeah, so one of the main things with subject matter, and once again, we've talked about this in the past, finding light is obviously so crucial to photography. The other thing that's very crucial is making sure you use your lineage, use your lines. Like what's the story we're trying to tell here? And in this case, clearly, once again, this is straight out of camera, so I can see a lot of water on pathways and benches, which is unacceptable. But what the story is, we're clearly not in America. I think, has that been made clear in this image? Another thing is elevated irrigation, as we talked about before, can be very hard to handle and very hard to light, because I have to really get down low to get behind it. The other thing you can see is, look at this line right here. See how this line almost meets the bottom left of the corner of my image? And then see how this line over here kind of comes out of the bottom right? How this line right here comes from the bottom top left? Okay, well, all those lines are supposed to be telling the story. They're supposed to be grabbing your attention and moving your eyesight to a particular aspect. The tiles here in the front are moving your aspect down the irrigation line to show your sprinklers are running. Up here is to remind you that we're not in Kansas. And then the pathway right here is to show you that this is a public park. This is somewhere where we're keeping water off of the pathways. The landscape and the irrigation was designed so people could use it 24 hours a day. It's probably a public park in Madrid, while still irrigating things, and then all that other stuff, guess what? It's drip irrigation. That's what we specialize in. So the combination of making sure our overhead irrigation is only watering annuals where it needs to, and the drip irrigation is watering everything else, is really what we're trying to showcase in an image like this. And obviously this is coming out of a irrigation contractor's camera. But there's always an audience and there's always a subject that in a story we're trying to tell. And in this particular case, you can see how those different circumstances align to produce that story. Did you not get that out of what the photo?
Yeah, I love that idea about the lines, right? Something I didn't really know before, and it's certainly going to help me as I take some shots this afternoon.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Just a couple more examples, same thing. We're trying to market a sprinkler. So do we need the brick buildings in the background at Florida State to be red and contrasty? Not at all. We really are just trying to focus on the consistency of the water droplets in the irrigation in this particular case, and to show that it's on a sports field, which is what irrigation sports field photography is all about. And then lastly, Petco Park in San Diego, good old San Diego. So the outfield on Petco Park, it needs water too. I have a bunch of the irrigation running inside the park on the sports field. But I thought this one kind of was better for what we're talking about now. You can see the stadium in the background, but that's not really the story we're trying to tell. This isn't a photo about the Padres. This is a photo about the irrigation. And that comes true when you're shooting your kids playing sports. Remember, you want to create the environment that they're in and capture the scene that they're in, but we don't need to see all the other guys' faces. We just need to see them. And so, as you shoot and you frame them, you really want to make sure that the story you're trying to tell going into it is, I'm trying to capture this for family members, or am I trying to capture it for the rest of the team or for the league, or just for somebody generically for the newspaper. And so you got to know your audience, and hopefully these examples kind of show replace the irrigation with a kid running across right there, you're good to go. And so these are my examples because this is what I've grown up shooting.
Yeah, I really love that shot. Boy, it both from a sprinkler perspective and a turf perspective, it's just great.
Cool.
So, okay, well, Michael, thank you so much. If we want to get a hold of you, we have more questions after. How can we do it?
So here's my email. Obviously, I have a Jane's website email. I'm on Twitter. I handle the Instagram account for Jane's. So I'm always trying to post good photography stuff on there, anything from ag to landscape to, contractors, controllers, distributors, events. So our Instagram is pretty, we're pretty on top of our Instagram. Unlike a lot of people in the industry, we're pretty on top of all of our social media. So you can always get the newest tips there. And then always feel free to email me if you have specific tips. Anybody that's emailed me after our webinars knows that I'm very open and generous with my time with them.
Yeah, well, this is super generous of you to share your experience that most of us don't have in taking photos and, of course, bettering the industry and helping all our customers out. And I really do appreciate it. Michael, thank you. And thank you to everybody who joined today. Really appreciate your taking time out of your day to watch what we're up to. And remember, at janesusa.com/training, you can see all our more than 150 trainings there, from photography to how-tos on installation. So enjoy that. And hope everybody has a great weekend. And thanks again, Michael.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Bye now.